Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you are curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I am your host. I'm also the lead pastor of the Loft Faith Community in Westwood, California, and an associate professor of theology, ecology, and race. Today's episode, we are going to be kind of starting with some election conversation, but really thinking about it from a Christian lens, talking specifically about what does it mean that Christian nationalism, I guess one might say, technically kind of won the election. So what does this say about the state of progressive Christianity? We're going to then also discuss our kind of takeaways from this election. Just what are some things we're still processing, lingering, some questions we're left with. And then we're just gonna, see what happens after that. How much time we have left? We have a couple of ideas to discuss about some stuff happening in the culture, but we'll get there as we can. But I am joined today by 3/4 of the of the pack.
3/4, you got it.
I'm like, yeah, I have a PhD in words, not numbers, so I'm like, I got nothing.
They admitted me to a PhD program, even though my math score on the GRE was embarrassing.
Oh, mine was.
I can relate.
Mine was pretty terrible. But I'm joined by Reverend Blair and Julia. How are y'all doing today?
Well,
making it.
Struggling well. That's
I don't know if I would say well, but definitely struggling.
When I was talking to Loretta Ross one time, and I had called her, and that's how she told me how she was doing, and I was like, oh wow, that's like really, that's a good way to phrase, like what does it mean to be like just in the struggle but doing okay. So to try to be honest about how we feel rather than just pretend we're doing okay when we're really not. So
what do you mean talk about our feelings in public? We don't do that in America.
Yeah,
that means you're weak.
We don't talk about feelings.
Feelings.
It's like Bruno. We don't talk about. I got that song in my head because my son is listening to it all the time right now. So maybe that's just me talking about Bruno. So
Encanto.
I love Encanto. So could use a little bit of an Encanto right now. just try an enchanted place to go. I wanted to begin our conversation today around Christian nationalism and the role it played in the election. For the listeners, like I also should have said, I want to invite you to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Thank you for those who have been commenting either in your reviews on iTunes or on Spotify, leaving comments for us to kind of know what you would like us to discuss moving forward as we begin to process and digest the election. And you still feel free to do that. We're going to invite you to continue to do that over the next couple of weeks so we kind of know what we want to direct our content. But one of the things that has been consistently mentioned in both places is just Christian nationalism and like how do we respond to people that we love or people in relationship with or that we encounter who still who operate on this theology. And while we're not going to do too much of that today necessarily, I do want us to at least acknowledge or at least think about what does it mean for us as progressive Christians, or how are you thinking about the role Christian nationalism played in this election, given the fact that we're progressive Christians, right? And what does this say about the state of progressive Christianity given the election outcome?
Well, Christian nationalism should be anathema to progressive Christianity that seeks liberation and like to model and walk in the way of Jesus, right? Because Christian nationalism is avidly opposite of the ministry of Jesus. He rejected the opportunity to be in political power and, tore down oppressive regimes, fought back against them. That's why they killed him, right? They killed him because of his political stance. So I know that in my bones, but what is terrifying and what we have started to talk about over the last several weeks is how pervasive Christian nationalism is, even in our progressive church circles, right? Because you ask any mainline pastor if they have ever tried to remove the American flag from the front of the sanctuary of the church they serve, and you will find out just how pervasive Christian nationalism is, even in the mainline church, even in progressive Christianity.
Do we have an American flag in our church?
No, we have a trans flag and a Pride Progress flag.
That's what I
We
thought.
got
I was like, there's not a, I don't, is there even a flag on our campus? There's one on, is there one on the corner by the sign?
I'm not sure. That's such,
Outside? No, there can't be because it can't be. There can't be.
Somebody fought that fight a while ago for y'all.
Yeah, I'll look and see. I don't know.
There's a lot of churches who are not even willing to have that conversation.
When I was at my previous church in Compton, we took the American flag out, and even though there were a few veterans there, I think the reason we were able to do it, in a sense, I was already having the proto against Christian nationalist argument. In the sense that I was able to say, hey, we're not about worshiping the state, we're worshiping God. So what does it mean that we have a state sanctioned flag in here? This isn't to deny the fact that you serve the country, it's to recognize that serving the country and serving God are fundamentally different things. But we were helped by, in 2010, when there was a Tea Party wave that arose, and all the ways in which they were defining, I would actually say that's about the time flags started almost being associated with this particular kind of conservatism that you see today. And so it wasn't as much of an argument. And again, I'm at a church in Compton that's like there was like, I don't know, maybe 5 white people and like 100 people of color. So it wasn't, the way communities of color, particularly Black people, think about the flag is different, with the exception of veterans. I would say Black veterans tend, all veterans are going to think about the flag in one particular kind of way. So, but yeah, to your point, like nationalist ideologies are so woven in to Christian rhetoric, even in progressive spaces. Sometimes it's difficult to disentangle them. And Julia, I think I mentioned this to you. I can't remember if we brought up on the last podcast or not, where like there's some songs, like music that we have sung in the past where I've just been like, oh wow, this line in this song caught me. And I was like, oh, we can't sing this song anymore about building your kingdom. And just things like the way it was written and the phrasing that was used raised alarms.
I believe you. I don't remember. I've never felt more at odds with the moniker than I have in the last week. This is the first time in my life that I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I'm not Christian and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. Maybe Wesley was right. Maybe it's not worth holding on to the name because they've won. They've won. This is what it means now to be Christian. If you're a real Christian, you're like Donald Trump. And it's like, do I even want to be associated? I don't want to be associated with. And it's like the things that I believe are so antithetical, and it's not new, right? It's just like the chasm between my values and the values of my nation are just continuing to, that chasm is just continuing to grow. And I guess the most disheartening thing is not that he won. It's just like, by how much? Like, yeah, she never stood a chance. It wasn't even really a fight. And so my delusion that there's goodness and that there should be hope is just exactly that. It's a delusion. Like most people don't believe that I was wrong. Most people are this way. This is what most people think. And this is what most people value. And that's unbelievably disheartening to me.
Yeah, right now, with respect to popular vote numbers, I have to see how many votes they think are left. And so
it looked like it might be switching, that he would not actually win the popular vote. But
they have it listed right now as he's got 75 million and she has 72 million. So it's closer, right? It's closer, but I mean, again, we have to wait until. Again, we're gonna be talking about the election for the next little bit. I know, and maybe I might do this
next 4 years.
Well, I think actually it's probably they're gonna lose the House and the Senate in 2 years. Like I feel like that's inevitable.
I think it's very sweet that you're assuming that we're just gonna have regular elections in 2 years. I think that's incredibly optimistic.
Well, what I think is gonna happen is he's actually going to do the things he said he's going to do? And it's going to get really bad for the people who voted for him that are like poor. And the wealthy people that voted for him are going to be like, thank you. And that's what's going to cause the swing. And it fundamentally premises on regular elections. Now, to be clear, no one's talking about election fraud right now. They are all thinking the elections were super secure
Michael
and everything
Johnson
was great.
literally said, since the Republicans have won, it's very clear that there was no fraud this election. It's like, okay.
Well, did you all see there was a Instagram live, not live, but Instagram reel from AOC that she said something is coming and it's going to be big and it's too big for me to even hint towards, but y'all just need to hang in there.
I am no longer an informed member of the electorate. So the answer to that is no.
You have divested your attention.
I have no idea what's going on.
For your own health.
That sounds crazy. That's crazy. What does it mean? I guess we'll never know.
And they added, there was a change in the like giving clause, the like fine print when you give to Kamala Harris's campaign, that now added that the funds may go towards a recount fund. So that wasn't in there, and somebody caught that was added the week of the election. So I don't know. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I do trust that we have very good lawyers in this country who are going to double check and triple check everything related to this election. That does not mean anything's going to change, but it's still being processed. All the votes have not been counted.
On Sunday night, I went to the gala for the ALCU, Southern California. Whoo! The people, the actual lawyers, right? The people that do the fighting. It was heartening to be in the room with those people because, they're ready. But it was also like, I think the thing that is the wildest to me is over the last week, the gap in understanding of what could be. So, like, to me, I understand that there is no bottom. I really realized this in 2020 during the pandemic. I was like, oh no, like there is no there's no bottom other than everyone dies. Like that's the bottom. But anything between wherever you are and everyone dying is in play.
Mm-hmm.
What has astounded me the most over the last week is that so many people automatically assume that the bad things will not happen to them. That's like the base assumption, like be it their money, be it their whiteness, be it their, like whatever it is, there is an assumption like, oh no, those things are definitely going to happen, but not to me, which I don't know how or why people get to that. Can I get to that? When does it become delusion? If I get to that, am I insane?
Well, I think to me, this is, a part of the lie of Christian nationalism is this notion of exception, whereas you see yourself as an exception to all the negative things that happen in the world because of your privilege as being saved or a part of the class of Christians that are brought up in the rapture, or this other kind of, again, terrible theology that centers the individual salvation over collective well-being. And so I think, Julia, what's happening is you have many people internalizing the results and saying, doing just what you said, oh, it's not going to happen to me because I'm a good person. They're not going to deport my family because I'm a family values oriented Latino, right? And you see this stuff where they're like, they either A, believe it's not going to happen to them, even though they supported him. This is the way in which the terrible theology of Christian nationalism can normalize a belief that your own individual salvation will make sure so God has protected you from these bad things happening, right? Or B, they voted for someone that they just literally don't believe what he says. Like, even though they're voting for someone, or I should say, they're voting for someone who they know to be lying, and they're okay with it. So what does that mean about our electorate, right? When someone's like, okay, he said he's going to do this stuff. He said he's going to do that, but I really don't think he's going to do it. That's just what he was saying to get elected. And so I'm going to vote for him anyway. But what's the whole point of having a campaign where you actually say stuff in front of people if no one's going to believe what you say?
Well, and I think that there's been a moniker in the US for a long time of like politicians will say whatever they need to get elected. So I think that there's been an acceptance of a certain level of exaggeration in our political process. Except what feels different to me in the case of Trump and Christian nationalists is even a small version of the things they have promised to do would be devastating for so many people. So overturning Roe v. Wade is an example, right? They have not been able to make a national abortion ban, but they did say that was their long-term goal, but the short term was to overturn Roe v. Wade. And people were like, well, they're never actually going to have enough votes to do it, right? And now we have women dying in their cars suffering from miscarriage, right? So there's a certain level of acceptance of like what one desires and like setting goals and dreams in a campaign, and then what is possible to be followed through on. But even the Project 2025 stuff, which I went and started to read this week myself, and we may need to like spend a whole series dissecting each section of that. But Trump is literally announcing the nomination of the people who wrote that Project 2025 into the positions overseeing the areas that those people wrote about, right? So like he is going to do what he said he's going to do. And even if he can't do all of it, it is still going to be massively destructive for so many people. And it is so painful to watch people start to realize that in real time, right? Like the uptick in searches for the word tariff. How do tariffs work? Like that there's this been massive surge of research on how do tariffs work? Like people who voted because they wanted the tariffs and then learning that tariffs are actually just going to create massive inflation. And then there's also an uptick on, can I change my vote? Right. And it's like, to me, there's a certain level of like, and this is my perspective, and I don't blame anyone who is just straight angry, but like, I have a certain level of pity that there are so many people who truly do not understand what they have just done and what is coming for them.
They're going to understand it.
Yeah.
They're
Eventually.
going to understand it.
Because they're going to experience it.
The word is
Schadenfreude. Yeah.
Schadenfreude, I think is the word. There's something in this that is deeply connected to dating and marriage, and hear me out.
Okay, now I'm like, let's see where this goes.
So women have been conditioned to, if you want to get married, and especially if you are conservative and you are looking for that kind of relationship, that like traditional relationship, there is a certain amount of you have to lower your standards. And you have to learn to accept things. You have to learn to believe things that aren't true. I have so many friends who are married to men that will say things like, he doesn't mean what he says, or he just says that, but that's like not really what he's going to do. And like just making the excuses, to make it sit well in the soul. And it's how they run their marriages. It's how they date. It's how they choose partners. And it is not confusing to me that they apply the same logic to the choosing of leaders. Like this, like you hear women talk about like the standards, the bar is in hell. Like there are no standards, right? And these men are still they're still finding partners. They're still clearing the bar. I mean, good luck to these little Gen Zers. But for the people that are partnered to people that don't respect them and don't even like them, the mental gymnastics that these women do to excuse that is very similar to the mental gymnastics we observe them doing to excuse the behavior of the men in leadership of this country and the men that they keep electing into office. It's the same. they hold these men to the same standards that they hold their husbands to. And that is too bad for all of us because the standards are too low.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just reminds me of, again, the ways in which we can use our belief system, a particular kind of conservative theology, I guess I should say, that argues for the kind of heteronormative, hierarchical relationship as the ultimate badge of protection. And so you're willing to put up with abuse, you're willing to put up with being mistreated, you're willing to put up with
Neglect.
all kinds of neglect in order to make sure that you have what you ostensibly have been told is the idealized form of relationship, and that is blessed by God, that is holy, that is pure, and that will allow you to receive God's blessings. When in fact, by the time you realize that's to be fundamentally untrue, you're already so deep in it, you feel like you have to do everything to preserve it, because without that kind of support, economic support, social support within the networks you've created, you don't quite know what you're going to do. And so this is the power I do believe that progressive Christianity has, to teach young people, like that these things
We can
aren't.
create an alternative.
Yeah,
It
one of
is
my
possible. Not on the macro. It's not possible on the macro, I don't think. Which is why, right? Like, I believe in democratic socialism. I do not believe in communism, because people are always going to be involved, and people are self-seeking and self-protective. That's why communism doesn't work. Not because communism isn't a good idea. Sharing everything we have so everyone has enough, that's a fantastic idea. It doesn't work because people are selfish, because our brains protect us evolutionarily. But we can do it on the micro. We can share resources. We can live in community. We can have more than our nuclear family living in our home. I've done that. I have lived with single people and my husband all in the same house. And I have to tell you, it was the happiest, most fruitful season of my life, because we shared what we had and we all cared for each other. And even though a lot of the young people who were sharing my home could not contribute financially, they watched my kids, they mowed my lawn, they made dinner, they cleaned up, they did laundry. When we can care for one another in community and share the things that we do have, everybody's life is better. This is also where Christian nationalism and a particular kind of militantly evangelical missional Christianity that's tied to colonialism and imperialism, so in so many ways ruined the world, because there were societies where there were many societies, most societies around the world, where the concept of communal living and communal responsibility was the center of their morality. And Christian men, white Christian men, came in and said, no, in order to prove that you are saved, you need to behave and organize your society like us. And they introduced hierarchy, and they introduced capitalism. They didn't introduce greed. I promise there was greed and all sorts of other things in every society, but it became socially acceptable because of imperialism and colonialism and the Christianity that fueled it, that we now live in a world that is dog eat dog instead of let's all feed the dog.
And
I think.
wait,
Go ahead, Julia.
I was just going to say, there's also something in it about, I've been thinking about Mad Men, which I haven't rewatched, but I probably will in the coming years. The mental manipulation of branding and marketing, and the ways that white supremacy, patriarchy, Christian nationalism have taken that. And people this week have been freaking out because I guess one of these trad wife influencers, the black one, it turns out that her husband, she is Mormon, and they've been getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for her to produce her trad wife content. But under the understanding of marketing and how it has been used to manipulate people towards this type of weird, dangerous Christianity.
Even the He Gets Us campaign that was in the Super Bowl.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
2 years ago. There's a new, so I live in Hollywood. There's a new billboard right at Hollywood and Vine from the He Gets Us campaign. And what is most dastardly about that is the campaign is so good. It's so good. And it actually is, I think, in the first step, a portrayal of who Jesus is and what Christian community can be. But I know that the people behind it don't actually believe in that kind of Christianity.
But that's how you
No.
get them hooked.
Right. Right. So you say whatever you need to get them in the door. And this is exactly what we're talking about in elections, right? You say what you need to get people on board. And like the confusion between Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act and the number of people who are now
Right.
finding out that they're about to lose their health care if they withdraw Obamacare because they're the same thing. That was just marketing. That's just marketing. They convinced a whole bunch of people that they weren't going to take away their health care. They were just going to undo Obamacare because they gave it a different name. And people were convinced by that. And I am deeply concerned about the educational process in this country. That's one of the things that's coming out of this for me is this is something that happens for a lot of mainline pastors who go to seminary because we have to have a master of divinity in order to be ordained and to serve. And then we get sent across the country, largely to rural churches, where the average person sitting in our pew reads at an 8th grade level.
6th grade.
And
it's gone down.
Now, yeah, you're right.
Sorry.
It's gone down. It's gone down. You're right. In the last 10 years, it's gone down. 6th grade level, right? And so
and that's the average.
We're trying to teach theology and morality and systems of community with concepts at a graduate level when the people sitting in our pews are functioning at a 6th grade level. And that's not a moral failing on them, right? But part of what caused Methodism to blossom was Sunday schools. And Sunday schools didn't teach about Jesus. Sunday schools taught school because those kids were in factories all week. So they were like literally teaching people to read so that they could read the Bible and learn about Christ. And I think we're reaching a point in this country, and especially if he really does eliminate the Department of Education, that churches are going to have to pick up some of that slack, and we are going to have to start educating people. And I think some progressive churches have done well in making election education a normal part of their life together, that no matter what the election is, that they'll gather together and have someone be available to answer the questions about whatever's going to be on the ballot. But a lot of churches feel like they're not allowed to do that. And I'll tell you right now, that does not threaten your tax exempt status. So be a space of civic engagement and civic education. And you may have to start being a place of just like general education.
Ed.
I mean, I think this is how, to an extent, we gain some self-determination that can allow us to free ourselves. You know what I'm saying? Like in the ways in which Bell Hooks talks about education as a practice of freedom, right? That's ultimately what it is, the practice of freedom, how we actually free ourselves from the tentacles of miseducation and misinformation. One of the things that y'all said that I want to kind of pull back to as we, I think it's helpful as we kind of continue to make our way through this conversation today is just the role of selfishness, Blair. I think, Andrew, you mentioned this as well. And the role it continues to play in the way in which we, not only in human civilization, but particularly within Christian nationalism, how it has moralized selfishness, right? Like, so you have this way in which, again, they're arguing for this individualistic way of thinking about salvation, that one can be selfish and vote on your own, or vote in such a way where maybe you can vote for abortion or reproductive justice in your state, right? In that same time, vote for a candidate who wants to have federal,
throw everybody under the bus.
Yeah, and think, well, I'm going to be protected in my own particular area, and so that's one of the challenges, one of the flaws. But I do think there's what I believe we have to do as progressive Christians, and one of the things that perhaps we need to continue to think about as we craft episodes moving forward, like our response to Christian nationalism, I would argue, needs to take seriously the importance of marketing, right? It needs to, because it involves crafting a story, a narrative that is a counter narrative to Christian nationalism, and the way in which it pulls people in through this lens of bootstrapment theology and selfishness, and how you're specifically chosen by God and ordained to do these great things. And if you are not getting these great things, it's because the other people are taking things from you, and that's why you're not getting these great things, or you're not blessed because they are exploiting others, they are murdering babies, they are doing whatever, and that's why your life is so hard. We have to find a way to create a counter narrative that actually is persuasive to people. And I would have not ever thought of using the term marketing, but because I feel like it feels a little slimy to an extent, right? Because it feels manipulative. But it's not about manipulating people as much as it's finding a way to convey the message, right? To actually tell them what it is we are talking about doing. That
It's
we
clear
that
and digestible communication.
Yeah, it's like, how can I tell you that we are trying to create a community rooted in love, justice, and compassion that actually is about serving all people, not just people who look like us, think like us, and act like us, such that it can create a space where we all can thrive communally. This is what progressive Christianity is. This is what progressive theology is. You
Yep.
should want this too. How can we speak to this in such a way that it invites people in? And we haven't figured out necessarily how to do that. Some of that I think is because we still suffer from the, Blair, as you and I were talking yesterday, the moral injury of evangelism. Like we still suffer from
Yeah.
like we don't want to, it's hard for us to talk about our faith with other people. And sometimes I think we haven't quite taken the time to craft the vocabulary to do that. And I think, again, like I said, we're going to be talking more about this as we continue to move forward, unpacking and developing and talking about crafting a response to family members who voted for President Trump or President-elect Trump, family members who practice way of thinking in this theology, because Lord knows we're all going to be going home or some of us are going to be going home for holidays and Thanksgivings, and we got to talk to people who we love because we're related to them, who have beliefs that are antithetical to our well-being, and I think we would do well. And there has been several of you have asked for advice and guidelines on how to do that, and that's some content that we believe we can help with. Julia, one of the things that I wanted to discuss with respect to the kind of political dimensions of the election, and I know we've been talking about, the four of us, with respect to the podcast, is our final takeaways. And I know there's one thing that you and I both are in agreement with, but I'm particularly interested in getting your perspective on, just the fact that as we are watching the news media kind of dissect and take apart the election, it seems that there's a reluctance by so many people to actually talk about the role race played in this election. And so I was kind of curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, I'm no longer informed. I don't know. I don't know what they say. What did they say? Is that what they're saying? I don't know if I'll ever return to being informed, but if I do, the only way I'm doing it is if we are dealing in reality. 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 Not what we think it should be, not the pieces of people that we hope to see in the world. No. The idealism, what we wish for, what we want the world to see, the manifesting of our better nature, absolutely not. We are only dealing in reality. And in reality, the majority of this country hates Black people. We can look at, there is data. This is not me just being butthurt because no. This is what we know. And I refuse to engage in politics if the parties refuse to admit that that is a huge part of the way that people choose who they vote for. The Democrats ain't got no business running nobody that's not a white man. I'm sorry. I said what I said. They should be running no one that is not a white man for the next 4 cycles. I said it and I mean it. I have zero faith. I had zero faith when she became the candidate. And I was, I maybe got like 2 or 3 points of faith and then it diminished. And, I never got enough hope to feel stupid, but I just need it to be real. I need people to talk about it. And it's so interesting that people are refusing they keep saying that it's the economy. And yet we know statistically that Black people are the most disenfranchised people. But the economy is the most difficult for Black people, and Black people voted overwhelmingly for Democratic policies again. So it's like, that even that argument doesn't make sense. I need honesty. So that's where I'm at.
No, I mean that I mean, what you're really talking about, Blair, honestly, what she's saying reminds me of like Reinhold Niebuhr, like in a kind of like pragmatic way of talking about evil, and that's really getting into some seminary weeds. But that's for me, it's I do think there's a way in which we struggle to, by we, I guess I should say, liberal media struggles to talk about issues of race when it comes to the election because it requires us to do some internal analysis on who we are as a people, right? And so it is easier, quite honestly, to say that it's economic and that many people are voting out of economic angst and anxiety. And they're looking back to a time prior to the pandemic when Trump was president and things were actually economically better. And while that may to an extent be true, that's Trump again riding the coattails of and
Obama. That was
of
Obama's
Obama.
economy.
Yeah, yeah, and also it doesn't take seriously the reality of the policies he's talking about creating and then what that would actually implement, what that would do. Ultimately, what we get at when we realize, I would argue, is that when people say, "I'm voting for president, I want to vote for Trump because he's going to make bread cost less, and there's going to be eggs are going to be cheaper, and things are going to be cheaper, and I can't survive in this economy." There's nothing he's saying in his policies that actually speak to that reality, right? There's
No.
nothing he's
All of
saying that
his policies
actually,
are going to make it worse.
yeah.
Tariffs are
So
going to make it worse. Mass deportation is going to make cost of food worse. The racist things that he is actually going to do are going to make the economy worse for everyone.
and so that's the part that for me, it goes to show, I think, a often unspoken truth in liberal media spaces. When times get economically hard, history has shown us that historically white people will then retrench into whiteness as a way to know they can preserve some kind of security. We saw this happen
Yep.
with after the Civil War, like when when you have beginnings of coalitions between a multiracial democracy beginning to emerge, and the choice people are confronted with, and like, well, I could choose to do the hard work that could perhaps potentially long term it will be better, but in the short term it's going to be harder for me. Or I can opt into this thing, this artificial hierarchy we've created that's going to give me some sense of safety and security, and I can frame it through the lens of economics, but ultimately I'm making the choice to preserve this thing that I've been given, right? This thing that I was born with, that is going to allow me some sense of security, some sense of economic and social security that I otherwise wouldn't get. And so even in the ways in which they are talking about economic policies, Trumpism is a a framework of it's an identity politic. It is not an economic politic. It's an
Mhm.
identity politic that has economic consequences, but it's an identity politic. And the frustrating part for me, and then Blair, I know that you got something you want to say, but the frustrating part for me is that you have some people of color, like you have this increase in Latino men that voted for Trump, this increase in Black men. Again, still, well, the Latino men, it's the majority of Latino men, but in Black men, it's still the vast majority voted for Kamala.
It was
You
like
have the
1% of
yeah,
black men
yeah,
that
yeah.
left.
You just have this, but you have this increase of people of color voting for someone with the idea that they're going to get the benefits of whiteness ultimately. And I'm like, that's just not going to happen. And the fact that you could fall for the okey doke again, I'm like, again, that's the part for me that just trips me out. And so, yes, I think the lack of the ability of liberal media to talk about the role race played in this election, to me, I find troubling because it's easier for the white liberal media to believe that it's economic anxiety rather than racial anxiety because it doesn't force them to confront the reality of who we are as a country. It doesn't force them to confront the reality of the history of a morally and theologically justified racism that has normalized the kind of economic oppression that so many people experience. And until they're willing to confront that, we're really not really going to be able to make the progress that I believe we should be able to make
But
within our country.
but that's because they are the people that need to be changed. Like, how do we have honest conversations about race when the majority of white people still believe to have someone call out a racist act that is worse than the actual racism that they've done. Like if the most progressive white people amongst us are still so sensitive that you can't say that's your whiteness without them completely losing their minds, which is the reality. This is, again, reality. That's still what it's like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can't have an honest conversation about it and you can't move forward. And like, this is why it always comes back to white people doing the things that white people need to do. It's none of my business because there's nothing I can say or do.
Mm-hmm.
Like saying to someone, that thing that you did was racist, and having the reaction immediately be a defensive one and never acknowledging that they were wrong, that they were being defensive, never trying to solve the problem. Like I see it all the time. I twirl in it. It is what it is. It is what it is. This is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
What can be done?
I mean, white people have to talk to other white people. Right. And there's been a good conversation, I think, happening on TikTok where very well-meaning white women were like, how do I name that I'm one of the safe ones? Which is so frustrating. And this idea of like, oh, we'll wear blue friendship bracelets so people know we're safe. And I'll have to find the creator and make sure it's in the show notes, but there was a creator who responded. It was basically like, if you want to be safe for Black women, white women, stop worrying about how Black women, like trying to make Black women feel more comfortable around you, and start making white women who are racist feel more uncomfortable around you. That's your job. That's our job as white women, is if you actually want the world to be safer for Black women, it's to interrupt and stop racist behavior, actions, and words when you hear them from white people in the moment. That's our job. And someone said, I need some John Brown activity at this year's Thanksgiving table. Yeah. And that is when we talk about, I was talking about like this ideal image, right, of the progressive community that cares for one another and takes care of each other. And the truth is, it's really friggin' hard to do because it requires accountability. Because there was another creator this week, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, was vertical versus horizontal morality. Rachel Klinger Kane on TikTok talked about this, and that in progressive Christianity generally has a horizontal morality. We love others because Christ first loved us. So therefore, our responsibility, what salvation looks like, is to love and care for the people around us. That's the evidence of salvation. Whereas vertical morality, which is the Christian nationalist, Calvinist, Reformed perspective of, we've talked about this, predestination, the elect, that those who are saved, the evidence of their salvation will be that they are taken care of, right? Which racism doesn't work in the vertical morality, because you get what you deserve in a vertical morality system, versus understanding that structures and evil and greed are so big that they exist beyond us and create structural evil. And so in horizontal or hierarchical morality communities, you can behave poorly and never be held accountable for it, because it's God who's going to hold you accountable. So we just let individuals do what they need to do and trust that God's going to take care of it. But in horizontal community, we're the ones, humans are the ones who are having to hold one another accountable. And that's incredibly uncomfortable for white people. Like you said, Julia, they cry. We cry. I'll say we. I've done it. I know. And I've worked very hard to undo that in myself and work on lessening that response. And that is baked into whiteness in this country, even in progressive circles. And to really live into the kind of community that we want to live into, white people do have to take accountability for that, and be ready to be corrected and to continue to move forward in love, because that's the only way we actually rise, right? The rising tide rises all boats, but not if the boats are still attacking each other. So like, we really do believe that to be loved by God means to love others, then we need to actually love others, and telling people when they're doing harm and interrupting harm is a part of sharing in love. And that's not everybody's job to do, right? Because the people who are being harmed most, sometimes you just need to rest. And it creates space for you to rest and heal.
This makes me think of the definition of love. And I think that is so important, because the idea of like caring for someone's spiritual well-being, and like, even if you want to call it their soul, like in these moments of like, if you care about your son, your teenage son's well-being, you will challenge, if you care about his soul, you will challenge, the weird misogynistic things that he says, that pop up. If you really value, like, if you care about his soul and salvation, that might mean one thing to me, it might mean something different to someone else. But like, if you care and if you love him and you care about his spiritual well-being and you are invested in that, like, to allow your son to kind of like be red pilled or whatever and not challenge it, like, how are you serving him?
Yeah, it starts in our own homes. It absolutely starts in our own homes and in our own communities. It's not some national, we don't need to like sign up for some national coalition. Like, just start holding the people in your own life accountable for not hurting other people.
Right.
It's as simple as that. Not easy, simple. First, do no harm. That is the first. In Methodism, we have these 3 simple rules: do no harm, do good, love God. But the first one is do no harm. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to actually live out.
Yeah. I mean, that was actually one of the principles I argue for my veganism, but that's another conversation. So I think, but to Julia's point, that I think at least a way for us to kind of wrap up this part of the discussion is really being precise when we're talking about love. Because I think what has happened is you have right-wing Christianity, conservative Christianity has co-opted love in such a way that it is coercive and abusive, as we've said in the last few episodes. And so defining love in ways that's actually transformative is critical. It is essential, right? And this isn't new. Like, we're not doing something that early Christians didn't do. I mean, Paul talks about this when he is writing in 1 Corinthians, when he's talking about how love builds up, but knowledge puffs up, right? He's doing this compare and contrast between coming to someone feeling you know it all, rather than actually coming to someone with curiosity, openness, and listening. One of the ways in which we've decided to, or I should say, as the leader of religious community, defining love is to, not only pull from the writings of John, which I think are excellent in terms of talking about love, but also looking at the ways in which we use the language of love in culture. And so I lean heavily on the work of Bell Hooks and her book, All About Love. And the way in which I have grown to define love within the faith community that I lead is love is the will to extend yourself. Is to nurture your own or another's spiritual growth. And in this sense, love is an act of the will. Like, it includes care. A part of loving someone is caring for them, but it is more than just caring for others because of the spiritual dimension of love. And by spiritual, it's not your own narrow definition of what Christian spirituality is. Rather, it is a definition that takes seriously what they feel they need to survive and flourish. Right? The interconnectedness that we carry. It's not about worrying about their salvation. Rather, it's worrying about what they need in the practical realities of today to survive and flourish. right? And this, I believe, is consistent. This is consistent with what we see in, the writer of John, when John is like, you can't say you love God and not love your neighbor, and you can't say you love God and not help feed your neighbor and help clothe your neighbor. Like, it is very tangible, practical ways in which we demonstrate love, and we have to be so precise and so diligent, I should say, also in defining love and saying this is what love is, and then identifying where love isn't, when people are actually doing things that are abusive, and saying, no, that's what this is. It's actually abuse. It's not love. And we need to be clear about that. And I think that's critical.
How do we convince white men that in relinquishing power, that there's still something worth having?
I have So this is I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to explain this. So there's this branch of philosophy called epistemology, but essentially
You
what that
got it. Go on,
means,
Dr. Carter.
I
Keep
know,
going.
I
You
know,
got it.
like, so essentially there's this way of way we think about where knowledge comes from, and unfortunately we have had this idea that knowledge can only come from this very narrow space of a particular kind of white, cisgendered, heteronormative, able-bodied man. And what that does, it's not to say that those ideas are inherently flawed or wrong, which is, I think, is how a lot of white men can be reactive and say, well, if you're telling me, what you're telling me is that everything I've done or what I'm saying is evil and everything is wrong with me. That's not what someone's saying when they're saying you should actually look at feminist thinking, or you should open up yourself to other
Expand
ways
your
of knowing.
right.
What we're saying is that you have limited yourself. You have limited your sources of knowledge by only prioritizing and centering a particular kind of knowledge. The way we actually can grow and transform is actually centering other voices, because your voice has been so loud, it has stifled our own growth as a species, our own growth interpersonally, because women and other people of color have much knowledge to give too. And without their knowledge, we wouldn't have so many things we have today. We wouldn't have math, like the algebra, like architecture. All these things came from like Africa, right? And so the modern medicine, so there's a history here that we have to also understand and get back to. But fundamentally, it's a decentering of a way of thinking, not as a saying your voice doesn't matter. It's to say that your voice has just been so loud. It's time for you to step back and allow other voices to emerge, so that then you can work together, not to co-opt, not to overpower, but to work together. And I found that to be the most persuasive argument, because it tries to push back against the defensiveness of saying, oh, you're telling me that everything I'm saying is wrong, or that there's something fundamentally wrong with being a man, or white. And that's not what I'm saying. That knowledge matters, but that knowledge has been it has just been prioritized to such an extent that it is seen as the only truth, rather than a part of a community of truths that we all need to grow.
You find
So,
this to be like that's effective? Like that's persuading these white men? That's working?
well, I would say, persuading white men in the academic spaces that I linger in. But at the same time, Julia, I do this in my preaching. Like, I do it in a different way. I don't talk about, like I just talked about it in
Right.
this, erudite,
You
big
do it by
words.
sharing other thoughts and ideas, and then people are sitting there and they're listening. And
I do this every time I talk about bell hooks. I do
Right.
this every time I talk about Dolores Williams. I do this every time I talk about any number of women of color, Yvonne Jabara, right? Like, I do this all the time, and they don't even know it's happening.
Right.
And so maybe part of it is just do it and don't tell them. And so then it's just happening organically. And they're like, there's this Brazilian feminist that my pastor was talking about one day, and it just slowly begins to shape them. And
Osmosis.
yeah,
Well, and
but
also inviting white men into expansive experiences. So we've talked on this podcast about toxic masculinity and the way that hurts men in their inability to express the full range of human emotions, in their feeling that they cannot engage in tenderness or intimacy, in their social pressure to choose violence over care. And that also means in not allowing themselves to be cared for. Like, white masculinity, toxic masculinity hurts white men too.
Right.
And also I think thinking about it economically and not intellectually, the time when white men in general flourished most in this country was when labor unions were strong,
Right.
when everybody made more money. And it is difficult to convince white men to give up their privilege in a system of cis hetero patriarchal white normative capitalism, because it's true, if they give up their privilege they will suffer, but that's because we're all suffering. So what we need to convince white men of is no one should have to suffer. All of us should be able to work 40 hours a week with a lunch hour and have enough money to purchase a home and pay for our kids' school and take care of each other, right? Like we should all have that. And you should not feel threatened that that's going to be taken away from you when everybody has that. Because the truth is, in this country, there's more than enough money to go around. It is concentrated in the hands of billionaires. And this is what they have done is forced, especially white men, to think they have to fight over the crumbs, when in reality, we all need to push back and demand that we be treated as human together. And also, that doesn't even talk about labor unions were like clubs, and they created male
Community.
friendships, and they created community, and they allowed men to be caring and intimate and human and have a range of emotions. So like community is good for white men too, but they're incredibly, and I say this as a person who is raising a white man, like the world wants to make them scared of letting go of their power. But I have also watched in my husband and in other white men who are in my life that they are better off when they let go and learn to love in actual community.
I think as a way to wrap this up and move to something a little bit more positive, we want to end with a little bit of joy today because weren't able to do that last week.
Weren't able.
I was fundamentally not able, like literally unable.
We weren't
like,
able.
No,
there was no joy.
That's true. Let's be honest, right? We're trying to be honest.
Yeah, there was no joy. I was just, it was just, I mean, you know, I'm just glad we were able to record a podcast day after the election. I thought that was pretty brave of us. But I think, and what I argue in my own work, is that fundamentally fear is the foundation of supremacy culture, white supremacy culture, male supremacy culture, it's premised on fear. And once you get people to succumb to being afraid, psychologically, you can convince people to do any number of things that actually harm them. And I think this is where, when you think about that, in light of how many times the Bible encourages people to not be afraid, right? Think about that. The Bible over and over says, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, because there's a way in which the writers from thousands of years ago knew that if you succumb to fear, you could be persuaded to sink to your base values in the ways in which you treat each other, in the ways in which you treat yourself. And so developing a kind of Christianity that's resilient enough not to succumb to fear is going to be critical if we are to move forward in this new world of confronting Christian nationalism. Now, let's talk about something not depressing, at least for me, and that is because I wanted to know, we were trying to figure out what we're going to talk about today. I saw that the world's sexiest man was named, and it's John Krasinski, and he is a very normal looking person, which made me excited because I was like,
healthy white masculinity.
Exactly. I was like, man, I look normal. I was like, well, maybe I'm a tad bit more sexier than I thought I was.
I definitely thought it was going to be Glenn Powell. I was like, there's no way that it's not Glenn Powell. There's no way. So, you know.
I got to look up Glenn Powell now because I'm like, who is that?
You'll know him when you see him.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Oh, yeah, look at him.
But there's definitely a turn back towards like, and I'm going to say paternal, but not in like a paternalistic way, but like we're into zaddies, right? Like sexy daddies and not having to have like a ripped bod, because I think there is a pushback against hyper masculinity and sort of red pill culture And what is attractive is a man who's going to
Not that.
actually love you, not control you. A man who can be affectionate with his children. A man who is actually going to like not be mad about having to help wash the dishes. Like that's what I see in John Krasinski, and I love it. I love it.
I'm just gonna toss my name in the ring for sexiest theologian. I'm gonna put that in next year. I don't know if they give that award out. I don't think anybody would vote on it or anything like that.
To. If they don't, I don't know. If that doesn't exist, we've got to make change.
No, Blair, I agree though. I think in a sense I was really happy to see that because I was like, oh, maybe we are evolving our notion of sexy to be more inclusive of more than just this kind of stereotypical masculinity, that it actually can be broader. And so in some sense it not only made me feel a little bit better about how I look, but also I was like, well, maybe we're evolving as a people in terms of how we think about the aesthetics of beauty.
I did see someone comment though that that the opposite is happening for women, that as we see a rise of conservatism and the rise of the trad wife as the ideal, that we're seeing this return to thinness, the return of late 90s, early 2000s dress, which let's be honest, fashion in the early 2000s was just how skinny can you be, right? Like low-rise jeans and crop tops, all of that was just about how tiny can you make your body. And so I think that there is also another double standard that we're seeing where, I'm glad to see us embracing men who are perhaps softer, right? Look, who are not hyper masculine, who are not built out muscularly, that are intelligent and kind. Not that how you look determines how you behave, but it's just interesting to see that sort of like softening of the male expectation, while there is also this increase in expectations for women's beauty at the same time.
And that for me is like one of the most, it's a sad irony, because when you look at historically the way beauty standards have evolved in different cultures and whatnot, like it's always been the great expectation, a greater burden, I should say, has been placed upon women to look a particular kind of way. And so it would behoove us to be able to figure out what does it mean to actually move past these kind of narrow assumptions around beauty. But that's maybe that's another podcast that I can participate in as a listener, because Lord knows
I have so many ideas.
I know you do. That's what I was looking at. I know you do. So
the thing that I will say on this part is, it is true that the expectation of women is always, the burden of expectation is always placed on women, that men can be and look and behave however they want, that in ways that women would never be allowed to. But the thing that's funniest always to me about beauty standards in women is that they don't actually matter. And that's the lie that at some point I would love people to unpack, is that like you have all of these expectations for a woman to be thin enough or beautiful enough and all of those things. But even if she is all of those things, that doesn't mean
guarantee.
Doesn't.
Oh man! All right, that's like that. That was like it's like a teaser for a future episode. I was like, man, I am interested.
But I'll throw out a little word from the VeggieTales that I heard this week. God thinks you're special, and God loves you very much, just how you are. But that's how the VeggieTales end their episodes. So I just want God made you special, and God loves you very much.
Do they still not have their hands float?
They have no
around
limbs.
them?
Yeah, there are no limbs.
Float around.
Yep, they can pick things up and wear clothes.
They can carry things. Yes, great.
I didn't watch VeggieTales. All right, learning something new every day. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. If you would like to connect with us and be part of our conversations, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at the Progressive Christians. There's a lot more activity happening on TikTok than Instagram, so I encourage you especially to check that out. Again, I want to encourage you to rate, review, share, subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you're using. We are actively trying to build the left progressive ecosystem to kind of push back against this Christian nationalist narrative. And we are excited about what we're going to be creating. We're excited that y'all seem to be very excited about what we're doing based on the numbers that we're getting in. So thank you all for joining us, for believing in us, and for appreciating the work that we're doing. And we will see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.